Good morning. This is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of nonprofit Utopia. I want to say thank you so much for joining us. I want to say welcome. It's not too late for you to join us here live in Crowdcast. So if you're watching live from Facebook, if you're watching live from YouTube, I have definitely put a link in the forum so you can join us. If you choose not to join us live, then you can also, feel free to make comments in Facebook and on YouTube Live, and I will be sure to check on the comments and respond to them just as soon as I can. I won't be able to respond to you while we're in Crowdcast because I won't be able to see. So if you want to join the live conversation, let me be able to see your comments. I invite you to join us here live in Crowdcast. If you can't find the link on my Facebook page or the Facebook page for Nonprofit Utopia, go to crowdcast.io /e/ measuring hyphen collective. And these are all lowercase letters. Again, that link for the Crowdcast is crowdcast.io /e/ measuring hyphen collective. There's no space between the words and everything is in lowercase. All right. And then just so you know, we do have a number of handouts. We have a link to our box file, and that's in the chat room. So if you are in Crowdcast, you'll be able to click onto that link and download a number of resources. And then you'll also be able to click onto a link to a really good article on collective impact. All right. So while we're waiting for you to download, I just want to go over a list of what you should have when you click on to the link. You will see the workbook from last week, and the workbook from last week was the major stages of collaboration. In that workbook, we had notes so that you could follow along, and then a number of handouts that would help you to determine the pros and cons of whether or not you should collaborate, as well as ways that you can vet your team and ways that you could structure your collaboration, and a number of really good questions for you to think about how you want to structure your collaboration. So, regardless of the type of collaboration you want to enter into, that book is a really good foundation, I believe. You should also see a download for notes. It's about 3 pages that you can write notes. I would suggest that you download that page if you don't download anything else right now so that you can take notes and follow along. You will also see a readiness assessment to assess whether or not you and your organization are ready to participate in such a collaboration. We're talking about collective impact, where you're impacting the whole community. And then you will see a sample. This is an actual document that was put together back in 2014, Save North Lawndale Schools. And this was a framework for collaboration. And I'll talk more about that. But, we were putting together an alternative plan to an alternative plan to closing schools, as well as a plan for repurposing some of those school buildings. So I think that would be a really, really good tool for you to refer to. In fact, we use that as a case study in today's presentation. All right, so speaking of presentation, I will bring up our presentation. If you can just bear with me for just a little bit. I'm going to bring our presentation into our Crowdcast so that we can get started. Alrighty. Alrighty, so I'm going to decrease and let the PowerPoint increase. All right, so last week, if you joined us, you may remember we talked about different forms of collaboration. We talked about strategic alliances and informal partnerships. We also talked about formal partnerships, joint ventures, as well as mergers. And speaking of mergers, we're going to have Janita C. Robinson from Forefront in the middle of March. I don't have the exact date. We're still firming that up, but we will have her here for a podcast, not a crowdcast, but a podcast. So she'll be on the regular Monday afternoon podcast to talk about um, ventures, joint ventures as well as mergers for nonprofits and some of the work that she does with Forefront. Okay, so without further ado, I want to get into today's presentation. And if you're watching on Facebook Live, remember to make comments, like us. If you're watching from YouTube Live, we ask you to do the same, to like us as well as make comments. I won't be able to respond to your comments if you're in Facebook Live or YouTube, not while we're live, but I will definitely make a point of coming back to you and responding to any questions or concerns that you might have. Today, we're going to talk about making a difference through collective impact. And before we do that, as always, I want to tell you a little bit about nonprofit Utopia. We are the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders, and we've created a safe environment in which you can innovate, collaborate, and talk candidly, very candidly, about some of the concerns that you might have on a day-to-day basis. We share a number of resources so that you can operate your organizations more effectively, and you can also assess your organizational capacity. You can assess your leadership capacity, and every month we have different themes, and if you complete all the work for that month, you will get a certificate. So there's a certificate for every month. Last month, we focused on leadership, and those people who finished all the exercises for leadership got a certificate from nonprofit Utopia indicating that they had completed those exercises. And this month, we are focusing on collaboration. So we got a number of webinars on collaboration as well as some exercises. And if you can demonstrate that you have completed the required exercises, then you too will get a certificate of completion. Alrighty, so that gives you a little indication of some of what we do. It's not all of what we do, but it's some of what we do. And our mission is basically to train the next generation of ethical nonprofit leaders. We realize that right now we're in a situation where within about 10 years, people in the baby boom era will be out of the workforce for the most part. They will have met the requirements for retirement in terms of age. So as we age out, we want to be sure that we can transfer some of the knowledge that we have, and in my case, as much as I can, to the next generation of leaders. And the overall goal of the community is to give our members the tools that they need to not only develop themselves, but to develop their organizations and make sure that they're sustainable, make sure that they understand what the most recent best practices are. And our vision is to strengthen the global nonprofit sector by providing development and training opportunities for 50,000 leaders between now and 2033. If you want to learn more about us, you can go to nonprofitutopia.com, or you can go to nonprofitutopia.mn.co. If you are watching here in Crowdcast, you can press the Join Nonprofit Utopia button, and that will take you to our membership website. We hope that you don't do that while you are listening to the crowdcast, but just so you know, you don't necessarily have to go outside of this forum to learn more about us. You can do that after the crowdcast is done. And also, for the people who are here in Crowdcast, I ask that you type in your name in the chat room. Let us know who you are, where you're from, what you hope to gain. And then if you have any questions, you can either post them under the Ask a Question link at the bottom of the screen, or you can post them right there in the chat room. I can see, I can follow along. And if by any chance you want to join me on screen as you ask your questions, please let me know. Type your comments in the chat room and let me know that you want to come on live. And at the appropriate time, I will pull you up so you can join into the conversation and people can see your beautiful face. All right. So, a little bit about me. I focus on community and organizational development. I've been consulting since 2003, and I'm also the founder of the nonprofit Utopia community. I'm also the host of the nonprofit Utopia podcast. I teach online courses at the University of Illinois and Chicago in a number of areas, most recently in operations management and program design and evaluation. I also have a master management degree from Kellogg in finance and marketing, have an undergrad degree in economics from Spelman College. Sometimes, as you know, our problems are pretty complex in our communities. We'd love to just solve one problem. If we're working for one organization and we have a specialty in a certain area, 9 times out of 10, that specialty or that problem that we're trying to solve is going to intersect with a number of other issues that we may or may not have the expertise to handle. And then sometimes the problem can be so large that there's no way just one organization can handle it. You need to have a number of different organizations with different backgrounds to come together and develop a common agenda that touches on several approaches to one problem or maybe multiple problems to move the community forward and to be able to scale the impact that you have. So today's crowdcast is here to basically show you how to do that. We're going to focus on the collective impact framework, and this is just one method of collaboration. It's not appropriate for everyone, but it's just one method. It's a method that creates really, really good results if we do it properly, and we're here to share frameworks and experiences that have been impactful. So we're going to give you an overview of the concept of collective impact. We're going to share ways that communities can tailor the model to fit their local needs. And then we're going to show you how to develop and implement a common agenda, measure the results, and communicate impact. And we'll share resources and downloadable handouts. And included in these resources and downloadable handouts will be an executive summary of some of the work that we've done in North Lawndale as it relates to creating alternative plans for schools in our neighborhood. And what you should expect, you should get a half hour or so of discussion. You'll have an opportunity to ask us any questions that you want. Again, we have the chat box here, and we also have the link to ask a question. Feel free to indicate any question that you might have. And again, if you want to come out live on the screen with me, please indicate that, and I will be sure at the end to open it up, and you and I can share the screen and we could talk about whatever issue you've had. We'd be very interested in hearing your experiences. We'd be interested in understanding what your questions are. If you know of any resources, please share those resources with the community. That's why we're here, so we can share learning and not necessarily have me as a talking head. All right. And then you will have access to the handouts. So we've got downloadable handouts. There's a link to the box where you can download the handouts from today as well as from last week. We got a workbook from last week. And then we also have a link to an article. And at the end of this recording, you can, feel free to archive it. So in the event there's something you want to go back to and listen to more carefully, you can do that, or you can listen, at your leisure, whatever that is, this day and age, go through some of the exercises in the workbook, and most importantly, use the information, share it in your networks. If you're watching live in Facebook right now, please do a watch party, share this link on your friends' Facebook pages. We need as many people as possible to really hear this message, understand how they can collaborate effectively and make a positive impact. This is a free webinar. We're giving information that you would normally have to pay, lots of money for. We're giving it away free. And we only ask that you use it and share it within your networks. So what is collective impact? And this definition is from the University of Kansas. And they define collective impact as the commitment of a group of important actors from different sectors to a common agenda for solving a specific social problem at scale. So again, it's the commitment of a group of important actors from different sectors to a common agenda for solving a specific social problem at scale. So rather than one organization taking a traditional approach, servicing their clients and serving, say, 56 people, maybe 100 people, if you work with other organizations along a continuum, you can actually scale this. And if you really do this right, conceivably, you can touch every member of your community that has a similar issue. So instead of touching 56 people, if you're in a community like North Lawndale, you might be able to touch, say, 30,000 people instead of your usual complement of 56. And that's because you're working with people to not duplicate services, and you're bringing a number of resources to bear to address complex problems. So the next part is you have to have a common agenda. So everybody who participates has to share a vision for change that includes a common understanding of the problem and a joint approach to solving the problem through agreed upon actions. And we'll get into that in more detail. So again, that's from the University of Kansas, from their community toolbox. And we will share a case study of how that was done. You also need to have mutually reinforcing activities. So this would be a diverse set of stakeholders, typically across sectors. And when I say across sectors, I'm talking about sectors like, for example, housing, workforce development, youth development, all the various sectors that have to be pulled together to solve the one problem you're trying to fix or to solve the several problems you want to focus on. So together, these actors coordinate a set of differentiated activities through a mutually reinforcing plan of action. And we will share an example very shortly. So there needs to be continuous communication. So not only communication within your ranks as a collaborative, but you have to also communicate what your intentions are to the community. And more importantly, you want to be able to communicate your progress, what you've been able to achieve, and what you plan to achieve, and how that's beneficial for the actors in the community. So in order to do that, you need to have trusting relationships, not only within the collaboration, but the community needs to actually trust the people who are in the collaboration. And when I say trust, it doesn't necessarily connote an issue of whether or not people are honest, but whether or not people can be relied upon to achieve the results that they say that they're going to achieve. Can they be relied upon to keep us informed? Can they be relied upon to look out for the best interest of the community? And of course, with all of that, can they be relied upon to tell the truth, to be honest, to be open, and to be transparent? And the more of those qualities that you have, the more impactful your collaboration will be, and the more sustainable it will be over the long term. And then the next thing you need to have is backbone support. And all that means is making sure that you have the systems in place, the requisite infrastructure in place, as well as the staffing, so that whatever goals and objectives you choose and whatever activities you choose to engage in, you can actually get that done with relative ease and be able to mobilize those resources. So, in a nutshell, the way the community toolbox defines backbone support is it's an independent, funded staff dedicated to the initiative, and it provides ongoing support by guiding the initiative's vision and strategy. Notice they guide the strategy, they don't necessarily dictate the strategy. They're guiding a process, and they're also making sure that the collaborative can move forward and accomplish their goals. So they're establishing shared measurement practices, they're building public will. And when we say building public will, that means making sure that you have support from your elected officials. Make sure you have support from all the stakeholders who are impacted, either directly impacted or indirectly impacted. The worst thing you can do is build something without input from people, and the worst thing you'll get is people not participating because they don't know about it, right? That's the worst. No, that's really not the worst thing that can happen. The worst thing that can happen is you come in and you presume you know all the answers, and the people who really do know the answers are not at the table, and they resent an outside entity or an uninformed entity making all the rules, making all the decisions. So it's really, really important that you can galvanize public will, that's political will from your elected officials, as well as making sure that there's significant community engagement and participation. You want to be able to advance policy. So where necessary, where laws and policies need to change, you're going to need to be able to engage with policymakers as well as elected officials, let them know some of the problems that you see and some of the ways that they can help you change the environment at the policy level, so that you can, as a nonprofit agency or a nonprofit collective, make the desired changes. And of course, you're going to need to mobilize your resources. Resources meaning human capital, meaning financial capital, and any other resources that you're going to be able to need. You're going to need to be able to move your process forward and affect the change that you want to make. And finally, you're going to need a shared measurement tool. So all participating organizations have to agree on the ways success is going to be measured. And before you do that, you have to even define what success is going to look like. And, looking at a certain set of mutually agreed upon outcomes. So you're going to look at ways success is going to be measured and reported. And when you report it, it's not just to funders. You're going to have to report your findings to one another, report your findings to the community and anyone who might have an interest. And you're going to be able to do this. You're going to need a short list of common indicators that have been identified that will help you know whether or not you're making any movement. And then you'll also use these data to inform your models down the future, make corrections as needed and all that good stuff. So at this point, I want to share a real world example of a collective impact approach. In fact, a group of us back in 2014 were doing a collective impact approach, and we didn't really realize what we were doing. I thought this would be a good example. This is a grassroots example in which we wanted to utilize people at the grassroots level, but also engage public schools and our elected officials as well as businesses. So we're going to start off with the question, how do you set a common agenda to address complex problems? In many instances, we get in a room and we talk about setting an agenda, and we really talk about all the stuff we're going to do without really thinking through the problems. So suppose you're in a community and you realize there are problems that's going to take intervention from more than one organization. So it may be people from different sectors of the community or different what we would call quality of life sectors like housing, workforce development, beautification and that kind of stuff, depending on what problem you're trying to address, right? It might be people from social services, your schools, economic development, housing, etc. And then you are going to assemble a multidisciplinary team to address the issues. And when I say multidisciplinary, I'm talking about people from different sectors, people with different skill sets. And if you review the workbook from last week, there are really good examples and good materials that'll help you to really think about your collaboration, how to vet people, and how to structure your collaboration. You also need to develop a mission, vision, and core value statements to guide your work. And some of that mission and vision work actually can't be completed until after you do a community needs assessment to gauge the issues, the problems, the needs, and the assets. And you want to approach this not from a deficit approach, but you want to look at what the community already has and ways to build on the things that the community already has to go and acquire new assets in order to solve the problem. So you're looking at what we have as, in addition to what we have to go out and get to approach age-old problems and come up with solutions. And then based on the outcome of the community needs assessment, then you're going to develop a set of goals and objectives and activities and outcomes that will help you to, meet those goals and objectives. And the outcomes will hopefully be measurable. And over time, you will look at those indicators, those measurable indicators, to help you understand, whether or not you're actually moving the needle on those goals and those outcomes that you hope to achieve with the activities and approaches that you and the group have agreed to use in order to address the problem. So here's a case study. This is from the Committee to Save North Lawndale Schools. This was a grassroots effort in the community of North Lawndale. For those of you who are not in Chicago, North Lawndale is an African American community on Chicago's west side. It's a changing community, primarily African American, about 90% African American. It is under gentrification. A number of changes have occurred and continue to occur. And one of the changes that occurred citywide back in 2013, our mayor closed 50 schools. Of those 50 schools, 5 of them, so that's 10% of all the schools in Chicago, were from the North Lawndale community, all the schools that were closed. Now, mind you, at that time, we had over 400 schools. We had about 425 schools at that time. 50 schools were set to be closed, and 10% of those 50 were in one neighborhood, one community area, and we have 77 community areas. So that gives you a sense for the fact that there was significant impact to just one community bearing a lot of the brunt for the school closings. So again, we call North Lawndale Ground Zero. At one time, there were 13 schools that were slated to be closed. At the end of the day, we lost 5 schools. We provided alternative plans to keep them open. And honestly, I think CPS, and when I say CPS, Chicago Public Schools, I believe they listened to a lot of what we had to say. They did not implement a lot of what we had to say at that time for political reasons. In fact, before the mayor was elected, he had already committed to closing schools and having schools turned around. So politically, um, in many instances, this was a huge uphill battle for people in the community. So, as I said before, they started off with 13 schools slated to be closed. Through advocacy, we ended up with 5 schools on the list. And this plan here was for the proposed reuse and repurposing of 2 of those 5 schools. And we wanted to make sure that these schools were repurposed in such a way that they could retain their original use as schools, but also be used as a town center, so to speak, and bring to bear a number of wraparound services, and that includes, social services and other supports for the schools, academic supports and other social supports. So what we have here, and if you're here in the Crowdcast community, you can actually download one of the handouts. The handout is the executive summary of that proposal, and this is one of the pages of that executive summary. So what we proposed was an evidence-based community strategic planning process. So that would start off with a kickoff where we would inform the community of what our intent was. We would show them who was engaged so far, and we would also give people who hadn't heard about it, people who might want to be a part of it, we would also give other people the opportunity to join and let people know of what the next steps in the process were. We also proposed to do a community assessment where we could get a little bit deeper into what we knew about the community. And based on the outcome of that community assessment, we would then engage in a comprehensive community planning process. And when I say comprehensive community planning process, at this point, I'm not necessarily talking about community planning as an urban planner might speak of it, not necessarily talking about the physical infrastructure of the community, but basically looking at the planning of educational assets. So looking at the various schools and after school programs and nonprofits. So that's what we meant in this context of the word community planning. After that, we would get approval of the action plan. So that community planning process would actually involve some implementation planning where we would assign roles and responsibilities for getting the work done within a certain time frame. And then we would look at community mobilization and education. So we'll always be in front of the community, letting the community know this is what was done. Do you like it? How can we make it better? How can you get involved? So every meeting would be an opportunity to get people involved. And then we'll have an ongoing assessment of progress based on the goals and objectives and outcomes that we had set to achieve, and then look at how we were how we were making progress towards those goals, and then we would refine the plan. And this process would go, it'll be what we would call an iterative process, where you're constantly engaging in these steps and constantly using the information that you get to strengthen the plan, strengthen the underlying programs and strategies, and making a bigger impact to the community as a whole. So, our rationale for this approach was to ensure authentic community voices, in this process. All too often, especially if you live in a large city, and especially if you have a culture like the city of Chicago, almost all of our planning is done from the top down. And then the powers that be tell us what they have decided, and they have a meeting, let us know what the plan is, what has been decided, and then they call that community engagement. But we didn't want that kind of process. We wanted to make sure that we engaged every stakeholder. That includes the schools, that includes the local elected officials, that includes the churches, that includes the organization. So we wanted to engage the community stakeholders, a broad base of community stakeholders in this process. And our overall goal was to develop a community-driven, evidence-based community strategic plan for implementation. And this 6-step plan would be developed over 9 to 12 months through data collection and a series of community meetings in the North Lawndale community. So when I say evidence-based, that meant that it was going to be driven by data. Whatever our guesses as to what would happen, or guesses as to what was needed, or what we would call in the science world, whatever our hypothesis was or our assumptions were based on what we before starting out, we were going to test those assumptions, right? So we would test them and bear them out, and whatever the data, whatever the evidence showed us, that would begin to drive the process. Not to a point where all we focused on was numbers, but we wanted to actually prove that the interventions that we guessed would happen, that we guess would make an impact, actually were making an impact. So our process, again, with those steps, we're going to have, the kickoff, and then go through the various phases. And then our expected results were North Lawndale citizens and stakeholders will produce a solid blueprint to position the community for long-term economic growth, using school improvement as a major driver for change. And for progress, at that point, we had completed a basic framework for the community school resource center that would be amended to fit within the context of a comprehensive community development plan with schools as the focus. Now, this plan was not adopted immediately for political reasons, but fast forward to 2015, when the community engaged in a comprehensive plan that actually not only looked at the quality of life sectors, but it focused on infrastructure, it focused on education, focused on things like transportation. This plan and proposal that we shared was revisited and taken into account into that planning process. So never think that the work that you do is for naught, even if it's not necessarily adopted at that time. you can always build upon it. So our team, we assembled a broad-based coalition of community stakeholders, and these people came from various sectors. If you have a hard copy, if you're here in Crowdcast, if you have a hard copy of this, you can go and you can see this list of people and organizations who were involved. So basically, this was a list that included uh, elected officials, it included the Board of Education, it included churches, it included nonprofit organizations, and we were always postured in such a way that this list was constantly growing. It was not meant to be an exclusive process. It was meant to be fluid, always taking into account the concerns of people from the community, from the grassroots, informing this process ongoingly. And we also knew that there were existing plans in place. So what we did was we leveraged existing community plans and processes. So at that point, the Community Action Council had already submitted a proposal to Chicago Public Schools, and they had a number of goals and objectives. And we took that work into account and we built upon it. We didn't subtract from it. We actually built it, and we created a mechanism where all of the stakeholders could be heard, all of the work that was done in the past by others could actually be honored. We weren't trying to put ourselves in a position where we were saying it's our way or no way. Okay. The goal is to take into account the work of as many stakeholders as possible, engage as many people as possible in an authentic way, make sure their voices are heard, make sure they take part in the decisions, make sure there's transparency, meaning that people know what decisions were made, why they were made, how they were made, and always communicating back and forth constantly. You do it like we do voting in Chicago, early and often, as the joke goes. So as you can see, we created a framework that took into account the schools, the Community Action Council, as well as this new entity that we were proposing. And that new entity would consist of that list of people that you saw in the previous slide. And this would be the Community School Collaborative. So we developed a collaborative framework in which we propose to work with the Community Advisory Council, Chicago Public Schools, and our proposed entity. And we outlined the roles and responsibilities of each entity. And this diagram basically summarized it. The schools and the community advisory councils would be focused on whatever happens inside the schools. You know, these are people who are experts in education. They're experts in the schools, and we didn't want to encroach on their territory, right? So we let them stay in their lane and we stayed in ours. But at the same time, if we were to come together and do this work effectively, you see all three of these gears grinding together to create a very positive environment for our kids. So while the schools and the community advisory councils focused on what was going on in the school environments as they're labeled here, we, the Community School Collaborative, will focus on providing those supports on a social level for those schools. So that would be providing social services, providing arts and cultural programs, providing educational supports to those schools, reaching out to community members, making sure we could not literally, but figuratively wrap our arms around the schools and around our kids and really make for a school town center that worked for everybody in the community. So the way we structured this work is, first of all, we looked at who was already in the community. And North Lawndale is a community that has lots and lots of nonprofit and social resources. We had at that time over 240 local community-based organizations and churches, not to mention all the ministries in those churches and the block clubs and other informal associations. So we had a network of over 240 organizations to tap into, right? And then we also, looked at ways those community organizations can be organized into different sectors so that this work could be done effectively, so that we could scale the work, so that we can make sure we're not duplicating services, and we could provide a comprehensive approach. So what you see here is an outline of how that work was structured. So we provide an operational structure that focused on key issue areas, research, civic engagement, and capacity building. And if you're here in Crowdcast, you can actually download this document so that you can read it. I would imagine that the type is significantly small, such that you can't you can't really read all of what's there, but you at least get the idea. So we had academic support services, we had health and fitness and nutrition as an issue area. We had workforce development, not only for the kids, but for their parents. We looked at early childhood and family services. We looked at leadership and mentoring, research that would support the development of all of these initiatives and also support the evaluation of these initiatives. We looked at sports and recreation, arts and culture, outreach and civic engagement, and capacity building. We really wanted to create something that was sustainable. And again, even though we didn't use this particular model, it was rejected in 2013, rejected in 2014, but in 2015, this same framework was used to explore ways to do the comprehensive planning process in North Lawndale. And these approaches, many of these approaches were used. If not in this exact format, the approaches are very similar. The subject matter is very similar, and this was done within the auspices of the education segment of that plan, which touched on, broader sectors impacting quality of life, such as housing, economic development, and all that good stuff. Again, the writing here is really small. However, again, if you're in Crowdcast, I encourage you to download this document. And when I say this document, I'm talking about the executive summary for this alternative plan, and you'll be able to see it. So this is the program logic and evaluation model. And what we did here is we looked at the situation. So we looked at the needs of the community at the very high level. We didn't want to go too deep, because if we went too deep, then that will violate our approach in getting input from the community. So we just basically created a framework with very high levels of knowledge that we had. We were relying on input from our community members to actually finalize the community assessment. So again, we looked at the needs of the community, we assessed the current situation, and based on what was going on in the community, and you see, this is the community situation here. We then develop a set of goals, an overarching goal, right? And then based on the goal that we wanted to achieve, we identified the resources that we need in order to pull that off. Some of those resources we already had at our fingertips, other resources we were going to have to go out and get. We also looked at the activities in which we were going to engage in order to do this work. And then we looked at the outcomes that we wanted to achieve. What was going to change as a result of all this activity, right? And then we also looked at ways we would evaluate that work. And you'll be able to see that more clearly if you were able to download the document. And after that, we shared an implementation plan. And when we say implementation, basically, how are you going to do this? How are you going to operationalize it? How do you bring the work from these beautiful diagrams, right, to the bare knuckles work to make sure that at the end of the day, we can do what it is that we say that we wanted to do. So we shared very high level what that implementation plan and schedule would be. And we did that for 3 phases. We talked about, the planning aspect of it. And actually, this proposal was to get funding from the Chicago Public Schools in order to support that planning. And then we looked at the implementation schedule, that is, the time it would take to take the plan from planning to actually doing the work, right, in which we would make a difference. And then we also included the evaluation schedule. So whenever you are engaging in this work called collective impact, even if you don't use a collective impact model, you always want to do planning. You always want to look at the implementation. And you always want to look at how you're going to evaluate it. And you need to do that while you're in the planning process. And last but not least, how are we going to pay for it? So we provided a 3-year budget for this planning process, and we're looking at spending about $300,000 a year to make sure that we had sufficient staff, not only to do the planning, but to do, significant outreach. It wasn't like people were just doing programs, but they were also significantly engaging the community very regularly. All right, so if you have any questions, please, I encourage you right now. We haven't gotten to the Q&A section yet, but please post your questions, post your comments, give me your feedback, let me know how you're doing. If you're in YouTube Live, please post your comments. I won't be able to see them right now, but post any questions you have, any comments you have, and I will be sure to get back to you just as soon as possible. And while you're watching the video, please make sure you like it. Please make sure you follow us on YouTube so you get notified every time we have a new video. If you are looking at us on Facebook Live, make sure that you like us. Make sure you share this link with other people. And make sure that you comment and write questions, and I will make sure that I get back to you just as soon as possible. So finally, we're going to look at what it takes to make sure that you're ready to engage in the collective impact approach, and not to worry if you're not ready to engage. This exercise will actually give you a sense for what is necessary. And if you're watching in Crowdcast, go to the link for your handouts, and you can actually download an assessment tool that goes into more detail to let you know whether or not this is something you want to engage in right now, and give you a sense for, if you're not ready, what you need to do in order to get ready. So the first question you want to ask yourself is collective impact the appropriate approach to pursuing your goals? So again, collective impact is an appropriate approach for addressing complex problems within a geographical area. So that could be a local community, it could be a city, it could be a suburb, it could be a state, it could actually be a national problem. But you want to make sure that you have the resources, make sure you have the people involved. Make sure you have the buy-in from the people who you need in order to get the work done, who can also help you to make systems change. So this would be elected officials, this would be clients who would benefit from the work. This would be other organizations that can help you to implement parts of this. This would be community residents. This would be churches. Remember the saying, it takes a village, and that's very, very true. So you want to make sure you got access and buy-in to all of these people before you try to take on this work. You'll never be able to succeed if you don't have buy-in. The second question you ask yourself is, do the preconditions for collective impact success exist? And again, this is all from the University of Kansas. And three elements that have emerged as critical preconditions. And I've learned in my own experience that this is in fact true, and they've learned from their research and from their experience. You need the presence of influential champions. So these are people who are recognized and trusted in the community. They have a track record for bringing people together. They have a track record for getting things done and for having the community's interests at heart. So you need the presence of those type of people who are going to push this through. You need sufficient resources to support the process. So this could be in-kind resources, it could be cash resources, and if you don't have the cash, you need to do fundraising. And if you need to do fundraising, you need to make sure you structure your approach in such a way that people really understand your vision, they understand who's involved, they understand what you need, when things can be expected to be completed, to give them comfort to release the money that you need in order to get this done. And most importantly, you need a sense of urgency. And for practitioners that don't have all of those things in place, it's strongly recommended that you don't start the process until you get all of that in place. But just because you're not ready to do a collective impact process does not mean that you can't engage in a smaller scale collaborative process. Focus on a smaller section of the problems, focus on a smaller geographic area, use that as your test case, so to speak, and then scale it up with the collective impact process. At that point, you'll have some results and you'll be able to make a stronger case and be able to attract more people. And then third, are the nuts and bolts for collective impact already in place? Remember, a few slides back, I indicated that there were already some processes in place. We had our CAC, or our Community Advisory Council, that focused on education issues. They had already done some planning. We also had access to our schools. They had already done some planning and they already had staff. So they already had the nuts and bolts for a lot of this. And then you had people like me and other community residents. We had inroads into the community. We had strong relationships with the community where, with a phone call, we could pull people together and organize them in such a way that they could move forward. So if your group has determined that collective impact is the right collaborative approach to use and the preconditions are in place, we suggest taking stock of the extent to which those elements are in place and you can begin your work. And you'll see that in more detail in the handout. Alrighty, so again, I'm opening this up for questions. If you have any questions or comments, please mention them in the chat room. If you're on Facebook or Twitter, I'm sorry, if you're on Facebook, make sure that you post. I hope that you like this. If you enjoyed it, please let me know that you've enjoyed it. Please like the post. If you're on YouTube, if you enjoyed it, please give us a thumbs up. If you want to be kept abreast of all the other videos that are coming up, make sure that you sign up for notifications. Make sure you indicate that you like us. Make sure too that you share this video in your own networks. All right, so if you have any questions regarding this webinar, you can contact me at Valerie F. Leonard at nonprofitutopia.com. And Nonprofit Utopia members, you can feel free to post any questions or comments in the Nonprofit Utopia forum. And I encourage you to literally join the Nonprofit Utopia community. You'll get access to webinars like these. You'll get access to a network of people who can help you bounce off ideas. You'll also get access to classes, access to high level networking events. And I think for $15 a month, it is really, really worth your while. So you can join us at nonprofitutopia.mn.co. And if you're watching in the forum, you can just click that green button, join Nonprofit Utopia. That'll take you right into the community, and you can learn more about it and some of the benefits for joining. And you can follow us on Facebook. Make sure you follow us. You can also follow us on Twitter. All right. And Friday, we're going to be coming right back, and we're going to be talking about the things that you need to put in place for a memorandum of understanding. So we're going to go into the nitty-gritty details of how you structure your collaboration and how you go from structuring that collaboration to actually structuring an agreement to support that collaboration and make sure that that collaboration is on its path to success. All right, so it looks like we don't have any questions. I want to thank you so much for your time. I know it's not easy to get an hour of time away from work, so I really, really appreciate your taking the time from work to participate. I hope that you can use this in your work environment. I hope you can use this in your community. All right, so one last call for questions before we sign out. All right, so I don't see any questions. I don't see any comments. So with that said, I thank you again for joining us. We will have access to the live recording within about 5 minutes after leaving. I encourage you to revisit this this crowdcast. There's a lot of information. I ask you to share it in your networks, share the resources in your networks. There are a lot of people who are looking to do this type of work and they just don't know where to start. I encourage you to share this with them. Alrighty, so thank you very much, and I will see you on Friday. Take care. Bye-bye.